Welcome, everybody. I appreciate you all taking the time out today to join us. We're going to go through some acknowledgments, welcomes, ground rules as we engage in a conversation about navigating socio-political swings and lessons from inside the administration. Uh, when I read the title, or when you read the title, you were likely filled with excitement because it's like, wow, I'm about to get some really cool information, or trepidation because you're like, wow, what am I going to hear today? Whatever you felt, let's be excited because you're going to be engaging in a conversation about getting the resources, the tools, but more than that, just insights about navigating socio-political swings. They happen all the time. Matter of fact, they happen every 3 or 4 to 6 years. They happen all the time. And it's no secret that our world is undergoing a massive socio-political shift right now. Notice I said our world because we often have people on these calls from around the world, different countries, and when our connected geopolitical world domino falls, it hits the next one, it hits the next one. So we're all incredibly connected. We're all doing our best to manage through the daily news, to the changes that all bring global implications. And so let me start with an introduction of myself. I'm Brandon Wilson. I'm the chairman, executive chairman of Wilbron. Wilbron is a management consultancy and public relations agency that focuses on helping leaders do big things, regardless the socio-political climate. I'm also on the board member for Impact Communications Institute, and I'll be monitoring this session today. And so I have a guest that I'm excited to introduce to you. But as we weigh in, let me first acknowledge that I'm coming to you all today from Birmingham, Alabama. It's the homeland of the Muskogee Creek, who are renowned mound builders, the Shawnee people. And Birmingham is also what I like to call the cradle of the civil rights movement. It is where things went down that changed the world. And so it brings me great pleasure to be here today. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to give some guidelines, community guidelines for this event. Please keep yourselves on mute throughout the session. We may talk about some hotbed stuff, and you may want to say, I feel, I encourage you to sort of rein in those impulses. We will ask you to submit questions and I'll get to them. And so we can have a sort of organized conversation. We ask everyone to respect the opinions of others. If opportunities arise, please remember to critique the idea and not the person. We invite participation. We have planned time for Q&A, so we'll make sure that we get all those questions asked, as many questions asked as we can. And please note that this session is being recorded and will be shared on our YouTube channel. So this is your 5 seconds to primp your hair, check to make sure everything is in place, get the dust off your shoulders and your collar, because we will be sharing this video over and over again. So with the ground rules, my introduction, let's talk about the man of the hour. And let me not do my friend that way, because we'll be having a conversation, right? But he's a distinguished guest. His name is Johnathan Holifield. Johnathan is a former executive director of the White House Initiative on HBCUs. That was a leadership role that he fulfilled during Trump's first administration. It's also really important to note that his incredible talent for strategic thought and executive leadership has also impacted the Clinton Global Initiative. And as intellectually astute as he is also athletically gifted. He's a former NFL player, and he's a great orator and a keynote speaker. So in short, Johnathan Holifield is a gentleman and a scholar. He'll be addressing the important questions many impact communicators are asking today, and using his skills to drive purpose-driven initiatives and accelerate impact during these unpredictable times. And so to ground us in conversation is all about the role. We're going to be focused. We're going to look through the socio-political swings through the lens of civility. And in shaping a society through the lens of civility helps us to examine the role that extolling values like its inclusion or advancing people's ability to participate in democracy, how important they are, what roles do they play, how do they have a role or an outsized role even today in these unpredictable climates. And so first, to get the conversation going, thank you, Johnathan, for joining us. And the first thing I'd like to open up the discussion around is this concept of civility. Can you ground us in a working definition of civility? You're on mute, Johnathan.
How many years has it been? And we're still doing that. Yes. Thank you, Brandon, and thank you for the participants as well. It's great to be here. And I want to connect into something you said about where you are in Alabama. My roots are in Alabama. My grandfather, 1894, born Tuskegee, Alabama. My grandmother, 1897, in Talladega, Alabama. Both migrated, and I heard someone on the line from Detroit. Well, my family migrated from Alabama to Detroit in 1920. First great migration. Grandfather, I was employed by Henry Ford, drawn to the idea of $5 a day, black or white. There's a little side note to that. The brothers had the worst jobs in the plant, in the foundry, and those kinds of things, but $5 a day nonetheless. And so my family is out of the Detroit area, and that's where I grew up as well. And that's a great connection to perhaps some of your audience as well. I also want to thank you, Brandon, for an opportunity for me to learn as well. You'll the audience, and you'll note by some of my language, I don't know the latest in words and phrases. If I present an idea that's not quite as refined as today's language, I'll ask for a bit of grace to allow me to learn as well. And know that my perspectives are grounded in mutual respect. And in no way, if I miss the mark on a description, coach me up. When I was 18 and 20, I knew everything. It couldn't coach me up on nothing. Now I'm like, boy, coach me. I don't know anything. So just a lighthearted moment. Your question. When you asked me that, and I've given it some thought, and I think for purposes of this discussion, and maybe even for long-term adoption as well, I love James Wernicke's description. He wrote a piece a couple of years ago about the dichotomy between civility and politeness. Civility being characterized by genuine engagement, fairness, striving for justice, and understanding in all interactions.
Powerful.
Yeah, I'm there. Politeness, on the other hand, is courtesies. Thank you, ma'am. This thing. Without that underlying animation of striving for understanding in all interactions. And I think, and those of us who are in the United States on the line, that resonates with me because our experience, our experiment, is about the pursuit. It is the pursuit from our founding to this day, the pursuit of the better, the pursuit of a more perfect union, that notion of continuously striving and never arriving. but continuously improving and getting better along the way. That really resonates with me. To level set, I'd propose we adopt Mr. Warnicki's definition of genuine engagement and fairness, striving for justice and understanding in all interactions.
I love it. And, we could not have scripted that better. It's as if we showed up at days earlier and prepared for that, and we didn't.
We
And
did.
my first time hearing that definition, and it is amazing. I think engagement, fairness, pursuit of justice is really important when we start talking about a working definition for civility. And I also love the fact that you juxtapose it with politeness.
Mhm.
And politeness is sort of a courtesy. It's almost as wind blowing.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not.
Kind of a perfunctory kind of thing,
That's right.
performer kind of thing. Thank you,
Absolutely.
but
Absolutely.
no underlying
And
animation.
and communicators on this call and executives who are on this call, um, they look out at the news or on the TV or out their windows, and they see a lot of absence, a loud absence of politeness. And I like to dive into how severe that is, but I want to talk about it in a framework, right? So the framework that I will share is one of the things that we grapple with in our industries. Both you and I are both consultants, but even as communicators, all the communicators, it's this idea of truth.
Mhm.
And we've heard it defined, the future will be shaped in a post-truth world. That truth is in many ways becoming democratized, where there are varying versions of truth. I have my truth, you have your truth. And so I'm going to write stories that say, this is my story and this is your story. And they can be wholly different from each other. Uh, I think communicators and executives and leaders are starting to become comfortable with this idea, uncomfortable as it might seem,
Mhm.
comfortable with this idea. Okay, there's going to be a post-truth reality. What I'd like to hear you articulate is, if we embrace a post-truth reality, what does that mean for things like values, belonging, inclusion, integrity, ethics? Does that also knock down the domino or set a precedent where ethics, integrity, or those values that are for a lot of people are seen as absolutes also becomes democratized?
Right, right. Yeah, thank you for the lightweight question, Brandon. I blow by that one without much effort. Back into it this way. Purpose. Is the purpose advocacy? Is the purpose objective news? Is the purpose just information? So I think you have potentially different answers for purpose as well. If I'm a consumer products company, my truth is that XY diapers are the best ever, and I can talk about it and et cetera. Whether or not that's objectively true is a whole other matter. So I think going to underlying purpose is where we might begin. Applying that further, a professor, when I was in grad school, brother, um, would call it true truth.
Mm.
That's kind of post-truth is true truth. Yeah, you got yours, I got mine, but then there's true truth. And that's a highly elusive kind of standard, but aspirational nonetheless. And I think my sense is that we could improve our communication by striving, by pursuing, maybe not ever getting there, kind of like never quite getting into the perfect union, but a more perfect union. So maybe we never get to perfect communication, but perhaps we can always pursue more perfect kinds of communication as well, where we actually strive towards true truth, if you will.
Mm,
Again, these are heavy questions. And there are no silver bullets, no silver bullet answers. They are at best silver buckshot, whole bunch of different
mhm.
approaches as well. And that's why I think my sense is your theme is underlying civility as we evolve this American, if not global, experiment more in the future as well. No magic, that's for sure.
Yeah, let me dive in here because my role as in this discussion will be providing frameworks
Mhm.
to the nuances, giving language that's actionable. And what I've indexed on there is the pursuit of true truth is grounding in finding or clarifying your purpose.
I think so. I think it begins there, Brandon.
Okay, okay. And what I like to hone in on as a framework, there are three pillars that create what I would call for this conversation, the priority economy, where we want our purpose and our values or our articulation of values to become the overriding priority in this economy. I dare say to you in response that in the pursuit of articulating or finding or clarifying your purpose, that there is a global set of priorities. There are societal or communal priorities, and then there are the priorities in your home. And when you go to work as a professional, let's start with our home. What is we're not talking about someone from another country or who belongs to a different culture or who may reside in a governmental position or in a leadership position. Wherever we go, the way we see our purpose must define how we individually start to demand our fair share of the priority economy. And
Mhm.
the more successful we become in doing that, we create more platforms to articulate our purpose in our home, then in our society, and then globally. So as a framework for taking that very incredible answer that you've given about truth, in our pursuit of true truth, we need to also reconcile what our priorities are and then lean in to our home and our communities and then the global community in order to demand a fair share of what we call the priority economy.
If you will allow me, Brandon, let's take that to the next step. You and I do that. At some point, we depart from what's your priority and my priority. Are my priorities superior to yours because they are mine? Or are yours superior to mine because they are yours? So eventually, we get to a place that perhaps we come to loggerheads. And if you will allow me to digress just a second with a personal reflection, that the dialogue, and particularly in the US, but again, recognizing this is a global audience, has taken on a dimension of sports. In sports, every game, almost every game, has a winner and a loser. Almost every game. Clear cut. Bam. We won, we lost. From time to time, you'll get a tie. And it feels like that standard of engagement with bombast and hot takes and our excellence and your fault, it undermines governance that necessarily means win-win or partial wins. There are few partial wins in sports, and I think that this kind of energy around We have to win 100. We have to win 100. And if we win, you must, by definition, lose, undermines the governance and public conversation process. So I'm connecting into what you're saying, but recognizing that at some point we're going to have different priorities. And how do we perhaps not even resolve, but at least get to the point where we can be functional with those differing priorities?
Let me provide a chance to provide another definition or speak to a definition. Uh, some communicators believe that these times are different times than any time that we've experienced in our world. And it just feels different. What you described might be a part of why it feels different, because there is a pie fixed mentality, or fixed pie mentality, where you win, I lose. Sort of this binary. You gained, you lost. Do you think that becoming the overriding tenor of our global engagement, whether you are in Venezuela, whether you just name the country? Do you think that is contributing to these times feeling different than any other time than we've perhaps experienced in history, or is that a fallacy? Like, have we experienced times like this before, sometime in history? I'd love to hear your articulation of that.
Yeah, with all respect to our friends outside of the United States, obviously my experiences with the US, so I'll speak from my own lived experience and study from being an American, less so with our global friends as well. It's hard for me to imagine that, and I'll narrow it to my own familial experience. It's hard for me to imagine my grandfather and his father, what I believe is the greatest generation of Black people in the history of America, straight out of slavery, who built everything that this moment is tougher than that moment. And they built communities. There were no Ford Foundation grants. There were no government grants. There were no set-aside programs. They grew their own food. They built businesses out of necessity and aspiration. So I recognize that in many instances, these are unsettling times, unpredictable times, but it's hard for me as an American to envision this moment being tougher than an aspirational people who were on the come with nothing, that this moment is tougher than that moment. And I think that'll lead to more questions for you, because we can dig deeper into
Yeah,
dynamic.
yeah. I want to make a shift, but before I do, I want to remind everybody on this call that you can feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we can start collecting them as I switch gears to start talking about decision making, impact communicators making decisions in these unpredictable socio-political times. And so when we step back at our organizations, we have a list of activities and priorities that we are being asked to execute. If we're the CEOs, we're going to our folks and say, hey, this is what I need you to focus on. If we're not the CEOs, we're going to the CEOs coming out and say, this is what we need to do. Impact communicators need to assess those activities in this climate. And we'll call them regularly scheduled, purpose-driven initiatives. How should we be assessing whether we lean in, pause for a moment, or redefine or rename those regularly scheduled purpose-driven initiatives in these times? Like, is there a framework for that we should be thinking about in terms of approaching that assessment?
I ask you to tease that out a little more. Um,
Yeah, I will.
why would we abandon perhaps the animating force of our careers, our personal lives and aspirations, because a moment that requires our attention, no doubt. But what I'm not clear about is why would we abandon, in some measures, our life's work?
Yeah. No, I mean, I actually think that that question in response to the question is interesting because there are few reasons to abandon good work.
Mm-hmm.
I'll probably edit myself and say there are no good reasons
Mm.
to abandon good work. Like goodness begets goodness. And I was reading something in the comment, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. So if I had to sort of tease that out a little bit more, I think it's important for us to talk about a root of sort of a binary tenor that has sort of hijacked the way we engage in our pursuit of purpose.
Mm.
And one of the tactics is fear, retribution, retaliation, and bullying. So let's get to the tools that strong men, um, strong politics, strong socio-political climates use in order to get us to reconsider our regularly scheduled good work. What should we be doing to either assess our regularly scheduled purpose-driven work in that environment? Should we be preparing to fortify our organizations against those forces? Or should we, which we all agree not, should we flee from the purpose-driven work because those forces exist? And so I'd love to hear you articulate. I hope that's very clear about the environment that many of the executives on the call, leaders on the call, find themselves in as they seek to do good for now and for generations to come.
Yep. My own lived experience. I've had a productive career. I've enjoyed the work. It expresses my hopes and aspirations for the kinds of contributions I want to make. And because I am not on a certain team, I have felt what you've described in my own career. I have felt that viscerally, where my work, and I'm going to use this me as an example of an organization, where my work was not valued, bullied, retaliation, retribution, not what I've done, my work. So my encouragement and what have I done is continue to bear down and make the highest and best contributions I possibly can. And I think because moments are fleeting, these challenges and the contributions we want to make endure. And in some ways, again, no magic answers, that's for sure. But boy, in some ways, that old toughen up in the right kind of way, gird ourselves if the winds are at your headwind. Well, or if the winds are blowing in your face, you're facing headwinds. Well, others, and we'll keep it in America for this point only because that's where my experience is. Other people have faced those headwinds in other moments. None of us get out of this thing without, I don't believe, get out of this thing without having to confront opposition, as you call it, retribution, retaliation, unfairness as well. And I think our best strategy is to not flee,
Mm.
to stand and continue to in a civil way, not in a man, civility is not
You
sappy
preaching now.
and it's not a sappy kind of no, it's firm, strong, stand,
Yeah.
respectful.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think those qualities would serve all of us well. No magic, man. No
Yeah.
magic.
Well, let me put a finer tip on that, an actionable one, because I do love your illustration about standing firm and strong even in the face of, and I'm reminded of a someone who just believes in taking command of the street. Cars be damned. They can stand strong and firm, but that car is coming.
Yeah.
That car is coming, and so we need equipment. We need equipment. And I'm reminded as you were talking that one of the most powerful tools that communicators have is or superpowers that communicators possess is the power of storytelling. And I almost wonder if storytelling in these times is a piece of the armor that we should mobilize for our organizations, for our industry, for the companies we represent, in order to generate the fortitude needed by that for others, not just for ourselves and always, but
Mm-hmm.
for others to stand resolute in times of discomfort. And
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about the power of storytelling, whether it be historically with your ancestors, with my ancestors, what native populations have to do, people who believe have religious beliefs that are not in majority are
Mm-hmm.
majorly adopted across the country. The stories that we tell ourselves are pretty powerful, and I love to hear you talk about that as armor of sorts that we
Yeah.
can utilize.
Yeah. Another big, weighty, meaty question as well, Brandon. Um, Something that animates my life that might help give a response to this question. Um, I won't tell you how many years ago, but a lot of years ago, I was playing Little League football for the Romulus Flyers. Again, my Detroit folks know about Romulus. That's where the airport is. And I'm 10 years old, 11 years old, maybe. And coach said, Johnny, my family calls me Johnny. Said, Johnny, I can coach you, but I can't play for you. And in my child's mind, I kept that only on football. I have to do the thing on the field. He can coach me, he can encourage me and all this, but I have to play. But that moment stuck with me. And over the course of my life, it has really become an animating force. I can coach you, but I can't play for you. So when we talk about standing, there really is no choice.
I like that.
Other people and advocacy and so forth, that's coaching. Ultimately, you got to play. We have to play. It's almost like if you use the alphabet, now this is an over the top example, use the alphabet as an example. We own A and Z. We own the beginning and we own the conclusion, period. B through Y, get all the coaching, all the help, all the support you can get, but you own the start and you own the finish. Why? Because no one else can. And I believe if you have that kind of recognition, it aids because no one else is going to do it. No one else is going to play for us. We must play to
Yeah,
get the results that we want to get. And that's, again, using a personal story and bringing it forth a lot of years, 50 years to be exact. That still stays with me. Now, I can coach you, but I can't play for
I
you.
can't play for you. Let me ask one more question, then I want to get questions from the chat that's been dropped. You have a philosophy that I think is important for us to talk about, the windows and the mirrors. And I'm not going to steal your thunder. However, it's a philosophy that challenges the owners of the A through Z,
Yep.
that challenges the all of us, the people who are on the field, the people who believe in equity, the people who believe in purpose-driven work, the people who believe in taking things, the people who believe in bullying. All of us have unclean hands.
Yep.
All of us.
Yeah.
And before I lend the floor to you for this, I want to make an acknowledgement that we like things to be the same as they were yesterday, in my opinion, because we've mastered yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
We have figured out how to win in yesterday. And when the wind shifts or the snow comes for the Canadians out there and it's really cold, it's like, oh, give me back my temperate climate. I want my climate that I've mastered. I've mastered. These are unpredictable times and they require us to change the way we move in order to demand our fair share of the priority economy. But starting from this idea that none of us have clean hands as the starting point for thinking about how we infuse our values in the storytelling, I think is incredibly important. And I'd love for you to take some time to talk about this philosophy of the windows and the mirror, and then we'll get some questions from the chat.
Yep, and I don't want to take credit for it's something I picked up along the way. Can't quite pinpoint it, but it's not my original thought, but it stays with me as well. Oftentimes, often, frankly, all the time, we look out the window to assess blame, fault, responsibility. And in many cases, it's well earned and it's well deserved. A necessary and imperative that I believe must happen simultaneously is to look in the mirror as well. What part of this condition might I own and be responsible for? It can't, in my view, it can't be all window and no mirror. No more than it can be all mirror and not recognizing external forces that have impacted the mirror as well. So I do think some balance is appropriate as well. Equity, the notion. Yeah, there's an objective and subjective definition of equities, subjective fairness, and those kinds of things are frankly open to some interpretation. But there's a dimension of equity that is not open to interpretation. And that means equity means ownership. I have equity in my house, my business, intellectual property, land, whatever portion of equity I have, I own that. Okay? Well, there's a concept called perfect after our kind. And essentially, the world we have is the world we created. No one else created this world. The equity discussion is always focused on the good stuff. Equity in the best stuff. Thumbs up. I'm there. I want a part of the best stuff. But
I
what
don't
about,
like the bad stuff.
come on now. Come on. That's the point. Come on now. All of us own our part in where we are as a world and as a nation as well, speaking of the United States, and having some self-awareness and infallibility of my own analysis. That just because I believe it and say it doesn't make it definitively, conclusively, empirically 100% correct. Allowing some fallibility, taking ownership not only in the best stuff, but in the not so good stuff that we created. That's why window, mirror, no clean hands informs a lot of my way of life.
40 minutes. We've covered a lot of ground. I want to get to the questions and the comment, but we have gone through the pursuit of purpose, being able to drive through unpredictability. And in our pursuit of purpose, we will discover what we call the true truth. I love the way you also articulated that there's not an option. There's never a good option to abandon purpose, to abandon good. And using the power of storytelling is armor that can be utilized to fortify us in that fight.
Mhm.
And also knowing that as you go through the art of creating stories that give us the armor, know that you are not infallible, that
Mhm.
your experiences, your values are influenced by the windows and the mirrors that you allow
Mhm.
to impact and shape the way you view the good, but also the way you take ownership of the bad that shapes the world that we find ourselves in today. And the definition that we're using, the adjective is unpredictable, is what we're
Yeah.
using today. Now I want to talk about power.
Yeah.
A lot of people on this call have the ability to use the power of storytelling to mobilize people to action. There's a question from Charlotte Gilmore. How can consumers encourage brands or the tech industry to stand by their values, meaning the customer's values, even when there's government pressure? Is there hope, or are organizations being forced to abandon these policies? Um, and so I'd love for you to speak a little bit about that.
Yeah. Once you introduce the consumer dynamic, there is no more powerful tool than the consumer's dollar. And this is a weighty piece when you talk about the ability of consumers to aggregate enough consumer power to affect what have become these just some of the biggest, most valuable companies in the history of the world. I mean, you got to go back to the early Standard Oil days to find wealth this big. Don't have a magic answer, but I can say that in the US, for example, there is no greater aggregator of wealth than the corporate form. And
Mm,
absent strategic and massive consumer visualization, realization, it will be super difficult, if not impossible, to prevail on these companies. It's
mm.
a high bar. Can it be achieved? I think so. Are you willing to put in the work? This is massive. This is not just have a meeting and say what you're going to do. This is massive.
So
And
we need platform.
yeah,
So we
you
need
need
platform.
that
Yeah.
and yeah, I don't want to discourage the conversation, but let us all understand just how massive an undertaking it is.
Yeah, one of the things that we agree on a lot of things, but one of the things that still stands by me and sticks with me as a framework for action. This is me going back to framework for action and thinking about mobilizing consumers and encouraging consumers to lean in and to vote with their pocketbooks or to abandon when companies no longer align with what they are. In order for us to encourage consumers to lean into their power, I think one of the things that we need is platform. I
Mm.
think it's important for us as communicators, as especially as impact communicators, to think about making the investment in order to achieve scale to either create our own or to encourage our companies to become publishing companies. I think it's really important that we start building the back jacket and the cover for our own books and putting our stories, getting people connected to the values that we believe align with our companies, with our nonprofits, with our initiatives, with our values. I think that's incredibly important part of the of the framework needed to start taking action. Um, before
And
we
Brandon,
go ahead, please.
quickly before we go on, let me wrap it up with the obvious development in the last 20 years. We've never had a time where the electronic tools, the new media, new social media, and the democratization of access to platform has been. While the challenges are off the chart, so too are the opportunities.
Yes.
Tools are agnostic. You can use them for not so good things. You can use them for great things. That wasn't available as much as 20 years ago.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I had a conversation the other day with a con artist. And I remember I got off the call and I had a colleague on the line and I said, "Did you enjoy witnessing that mastery?" And my colleague said, "I have a hard time applying the title of master to someone who is a grifter." And I
Mm,
said, "Well, why?" Because mastery is not only relegated to good. To your point, right? I
it's
just
all
enjoy
right.
seeing a master at work. I was not conned,
Right.
but it was great seeing the person work. As we wrap up, I want to touch on this idea of adaptability. 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 How can impact communicators create strategies that are resilient? And want you to talk about, like almost in rapid fire as we do the last 10 minutes, three practices for agile storytelling. And so tell us about how impact communicators can start with reconciling poise over bluster. There are three of them. So we'll start with poise over bluster.
Absolutely. I think we're in an era of bluster, and it kind of goes back to our earlier discussion about watch me make up a word, the sportsification of our social dialogue, that everything is a hot take, everything is bombast. There are definite winners, there are definite losers. If you don't win the championship, you're trash. I mean, and that's really how we talk about in our social dialogue as well. And this notion of poise, recognizing nuance, recognizing the pursuit of true truth. May not ever get there, but boy, there's a whole lot of progress in the pursuit of true truth that recognizes that while the headwinds are at my back now, those who disagree with me, it's in their face. And at some point, because of the ebb and flow of society, at some point that's going to be in my face. Do I crumble? Do I recognize that my fellow countrymen and fellow global citizens have points of view that are worthy of consideration that you may not ever agree with, but they're worthy because they are held by human beings and they're to be respected and not just vilified with easy to pronounce kinds of words and phrases that just inflame situations. Don't by any means abandon your objective or your values. But in order to govern, to lead, it's not sports. There are partial wins. Partial win for you means the other partial meant for someone who doesn't quite align with your beliefs. In sports, there's not that, generally speaking. And I think that underlying evolution has really done something to how we speak and how we act with one another as well. So that's what.
The second practice for agile storytelling is reconciling risk attute over risk averse. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, your example. You said you don't go out in the street and think you can beat a car. Well, that's risky. The opposite of risk averse is not risky. The opposite of risk averse is risk astute. And the ability to make assessments and take smarter risks, to be able to risk wisely and not wildly and frivolously or gratuitously. That's the difference. And let's take smart risks. Let's risk being the outsider and not just in an echo chamber among people who have the same fundamental set of beliefs that we do, but be willing to engage those that don't. So no, we don't ever want to be risk averse, but
And
we
the
don't want to be risky.
and the last is now
Mhm.
that we said, look, I don't want to be risk avert and I don't want to be risky. We want to now be influential. So can we talk about the reconciling, and the last one is influence over coercion?
Absolutely. Some of my own experience that I shared with you early, that was coercion. To advance my career, you must bend the knee to certain points of view. That's coercion. Influence, on the other hand, is just that, the ability to make a case, to be opportunities to be heard on that case. Know that you may win a lot, but you will always also not win a lot. That's part of the journey of living in a multi-belief democracy, such as what we enjoy. And this notion of browbeating and cancel culture and these kinds of things, those are all forms of coercion versus
Mm.
setting forth an agenda, your belief set, and winning support for what your point of view is as well. Influence versus coercion.
Amazing. I love those reconciliations. I think they're important because it challenges uh, the the human aspect. So how fallible we are, to think about what we really are getting after when we build our stories of impact. Uh, Before I give my closing remarks, I want to recap for all the communicators who are on here, been taking incredible notes. And Johnathan is incredibly well versed in the impact of strategy um, and how to build strategies that can be executed in any kind of environment. And as a communicator myself, I want to translate the three components that I think are working frameworks for us before we wrap. The first is purpose.
Mhm.
This idea of finding our companies, our board of directors, true truth. What is the true truth within our organization, within our companies that we lead or that we founded? And once we clarify that purpose, I think the next action is to build platform for that purpose. Build publishing arms, social media platforms, blog posts, organs that you can start to infuse your stories and your purpose into. And then the last is mobilizing community, getting providing that platform the ability for people to plug into so that they can mobilize and stand with you and start giving echo and reverb to the stories that we want to tell that matter to this generation and for impacting future generations.
Well said.
It's
I
not
can.
me, that's your words.
Well, to put a lighter point on it, or lighter moment, you're brilliant. You think like me.
Listen, Johnathan, this has been great. You did not ask me to do what I'm going to do next, but we've gotten in the comments, some people trying to play Wheel of Fortune behind you. It's like, what is behind him? So Johnathan is, I told him he's a gentleman and a scholar. As a scholar, he's also an author. And the book that he has written and published is called The Future Economy and Inclusive Competitiveness: How Demographic Trends and Innovation Can Create Economic Prosperity for All Americans. Join me in giving Johnathan Holifield a virtual round of applause. I want to thank you so much for your time and your intellect, your perspective, which is challenging. It was challenging for a lot of us. And I want to thank you all for joining. And remember to take the Impact Communications Institute pledge for responsible and ethical communications at impactcommsinstitute.org. Again, that is impactcommsinstitute.org, where you will also find upcoming events. Thank y'all so much. Let's start to lean in. Let's stand before the car, not abandon our good work. But before you go out there, make storytelling your armor. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Brandon.